welcome into Texans Today, everybody. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, coming at you with another at-home video. Still iced in, but hopefully I'll be back in the studio tomorrow for my normal live shows. Reminder, I go live on Wednesdays at 3:30 Central Time, so make sure you pull up, turn on your notifications, and spam those H's if you're rocking with me. Still here today, another at-home video, and if you're going to pull up to my live show tomorrow, make sure to drop those H's down in the comment section. I appreciate y'all rocking and rolling with me. But we got two orders of business to talk about on today's show. First off, the Texans, could they be losing a mastermind? Somebody who has really helped this Texans team build up their defense. I'll tell you who might be on their way out of the city of Houston, and also a lot of NFL coaching news that happened today, and a lot of it could affect your Houston Texans. Some of it I know affects your Houston Texans. So we're going to get into all the NFL coaching news on today's show. But first, let's talk about the Texans assistant GM, James Lipford, who could be on the move. He got a second interview, currently is headed to Atlanta to interview for the Falcons open GM role. Now, they hired their head coach, Kevin Stefanski, and now are looking to replace their past GM. And James Lipford is one of the top two finalists for that position. And a lot of people think he's probably going to get that role as the next Falcons GM. And I know all of you are out there wondering, who in the world is James Lipford? Which I also had to do my research today. But luckily for you, I did all the research today, so you don't have to. All right, first, let's talk about how long he's been with the Houston Texans. He's been with this organization since 2018 and has served as the director of college scouting until his latest promotion this past year. He was actually promoted to assistant GM. And, I'll tell you what Nick Caserio had to say about him in just a moment, but very glowing remarks around James Lipford. And a lot of people around the league have a lot of respect for him as a scout and as a up-and-coming front office member in the NFL. Prior to joining the Texans, of course, you probably could have guessed this one. He worked with the New England Patriots for 9 seasons. He started as a scouting assistant, then became the area scout in through 2011 to 2014, and finished as the national scout 2015 to 2017 before coming on over to the Houston Texans in 2018, where he quickly rose up the ranks and, like I said, this past season got promoted to the role as assistant GM. And a lot of people see him as like one of the main guys in charge of the Texans scouting department. Since joining the Texans, we've had some really good defensive picks in the middle rounds, and a lot of people might point to James Lipford for being one of the reasons why the Texans have been able to scout so well in those middle rounds, especially on the defensive side. Lipford was a former linebacker at Georgia Tech and, was not a scrub whatsoever. He was pretty good with his time with the Yellow Jackets there. And funny enough, I actually found a clip from one of his former teammates. He was actually the quarterback at Georgia Tech while James Lipford was there. And obviously they're boys, so take it with a grain of salt. But this is what he had to say around James Lipford possibly being the next Falcons GM. He said, with my time with him, their freshman year at Georgia Tech, he said he could tell you every player, his high school, his stats, siblings, what they like to do. He knew every single thing about all these players and was kind of alluding to the fact that he was getting ready to be in a NFL front office or work for an NFL team or a scouting department before he even graduated, before he was even done playing college ball. So from some very glowing remarks from his former quarterback there, Reggie Ball at Georgia Tech. And, like I said, a lot of defensive picks in the middle rounds the Texans have hit on. And could he possibly be the reason for that? Obviously, the Texans, they traded up for Will Anderson Jr. They got Derek Stingley, which, if we all remember, a lot of people were very critical of that pick that the Texans chose Derek Stingley over Sauce Gardner. Turns out, looks like they made the right decision in that aspect. But in terms of the middle rounds, Calen Bullock, Henry To'o. This past year, they got, Jalen Smith, Jalen Reed, both guys injured. But Jalen Reed looks like a diamond in the rough. They were able to get him in the 6th round and, played some meaningful minutes for the Houston Texans this year. And you look at, beyond that, I remember when the Texans drafted Kamari Lassiter in the 2nd round. And if you don't remember, the pick before the Texans, the Saints got Kool-Aid McKinstry, and everybody was so upset. Everybody was like, no, this is the worst thing ever. I can't believe the Texans didn't get Kool-Aid McKinstry, and now they're stuck with this guy, Kamari Lassiter. Turns out Lassiter is freaking good, right? He's a Pro Bowler this year. Him and Calen Bullock both getting that honors, being elevated to the Pro Bowl, even though, with Shedeur Sanders being in the Pro Bowl, maybe it's just a, glorified pickup game at this point, because I don't really think, neither here nor there. The Texans, they've made some really good picks on the defensive side of the football. And like I said, he's very well respected. A lot of people view him as an up-and-comer in the NFL front office world. And Nick Caserio himself said it would be a huge loss if the Falcons decided to hire him. This is what Caserio had to say on James Lipford. Works really hard. I rely on him for a lot. He's earned his opportunity, so credit to him. Whatever the Falcons decide to do, but hopefully he's here helping the Texans. He's fortunate to have that opportunity, and I'm sure he'll do a good job with it. I mean, right there, if that doesn't tell you anything, he says he relies on him a lot. He's earned the opportunity, and he's hoping that the Falcons pass on him so the Texans can keep him for another season. And with the Texans having, a bounty of picks this year, 2 second-rounders, 2 fourth-rounders, and their 3rd-rounder coming from the New York Giants, so it's higher up in that round, it is going to be critical for this team to hit on those middle-round picks. And not necessarily on the defensive side. I think we're pretty good on that side of the football, even though they could use to replenish, the defensive tackle spot, the secondary position, those 2 spots, really, secondary depth more at that. Definitely could look to add there in the draft, but if he's not in the war room, if he's not there for the Texans draft this year, that could directly impact this Houston Texans squad. And I'm really interested to see how the Falcons go about that if they go ahead and hire him as their next GM, because a lot of people I saw, people being like, oh, well, the Texans can't scout O-linemen, the Texans can't scout this, whatever, he's not that good. I disagree. I think he would be a big loss for this Texans team. And when you look at what the Texans were able to do over the past 5 years in terms of adding guys through the draft on the defensive side of the football, I mean, he's been fantastic. He's been fantastic at that. And the scouting department, I think, is a big part of that. And James Liipfert, I think, is a big part of that scouting department. So, big get for the Atlanta Falcons if they're able to get him as their next GM. All right, we're going to get into some NFL coaching news that directly impacts the Houston Texans. But before I do, couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our amazing sponsors over at Prize Picks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event rather than Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get in on the football action before next season. So close the season out right with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. If you miss fantasy football, I know I do. My team, it was cooked, but still, I have fun playing it. Prize Picks lets you play fantasy football every week. Pick your favorite players and win when they hit their projections every single week. And now, the big game's here, but it's not only football. They also have basketball, they have hockey, baseball right around the corner. So whatever sport you're into, Prize Picks, they got you covered. Get in on the action right now. It's available in all 50 states, and it's super simple. All you got to do, pick more or less on at least 2 player stats. If you get your picks right, you can cash in big time. Make sure to go, it's in the comments and description right now. Download the Prize Picks app. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. All right, let's go down the list of the NFL coaching news that you need to know. First up, Tanner Engstrand fired from the New York Jets, their offensive coordinator, after only 1 season in New York. Now, Tanner Engstrand was a popular name around offensive coordinator roles last offseason, especially when the Texans were looking at offensive coordinators. It was really him and Nick Caley were both being looked at for that Jets job. They end up going with Engstrand, and I think he kind of got the raw end of the deal. Really didn't get great quarterback play from Justin Fields this year. They basically imploded the whole team halfway through the year at the trade deadline, trading their 2 best defensive players, and Breece Hall won it out as well. So it wasn't a pretty sight at all for Aaron Glenn's first year in New York. And as a first-time head coach, he needed to make some changes, and looked like Engstrand was the kind of, I would say, odd man out, kind of not really his fault, but kind of using him as a scapegoat in this instance. Before getting the Jets job, he was the Lions passing games coordinator for the 2023-2024 seasons. Before that, he was a tight end coach for the Detroit Lions. And the Texans might have had some interest in him last offseason. The question now, Bears, could he possibly be brought in for a passing game coordinator role or another role on this Texans offensive staff, possibly, head assistant or, something to help this Texans offense kind of get jump started under Nick Caley, because they're going to roll with Caley next year, but I think they need to add a couple more position coaches, a couple more offensive minded guys to kind of help lead the ship for the Houston Texans. I think he could be an interesting name. Now, it would make sense for him to go back to the Detroit Lions or even follow Ben Johnson to the Chicago Bears. Both those, seem like the more likely choice for Engstrand, who, as I said, was OC for only one season with the New York Jets. But if the Texans are somehow able to bring him in and, have him help out CJ Stroud, help out this passing game for the Houston Texans, maybe the more, minds in the building could definitely help out Stroud and help out this offense. I don't know if he would mesh well with Caley or mesh well with this, offensive staff that we have with him. Cole Popovich is, the run game coordinator, O-line coach for the Houston Texans. But definitely something to consider and definitely something to keep your eyes out on. I like I said, I do think he follows, either Ben Johnson to Chicago or he goes back to the Detroit Lions and helps out Dan Campbell. But a very interesting name, because it was reported a couple days ago that, he was going to get demoted and stay with the New York Jets, and they were going to bring in Frank Reich to, help this offensive staff. I don't know if something changed or if, Tanner Engstrand said, no, I'm not taking a demotion. I'm not doing this, that, and the other. I'd rather leave and go somewhere else than deal with this. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but all we need to know is he is no longer a member of the New York Jets coaching staff. Now, that wasn't the only big coaching news that happened today, as the Buffalo Bills hired Joe Brady as their next head coach. And I mean, this one was so confusing because talking to our Bills host Tyler Smith and just getting a pulse of Bills fans, they didn't really love Joe Brady and felt like maybe he was more to blame than Sean McDermott, and they end up firing their head coach, Sean McDermott. They go ahead and just promote Joe Brady to be their head coach. I'm not sure if that was the plan all along or if, the guy they wanted didn't end up wanting to come to the Buffalo Bills. I don't know why you wouldn't want to come to the Bills with Josh Allen, but it is interesting the fact that they just went ahead and promoted from within. Maybe has something to do with their GM, Brandon Beane, who threw Sean McDermott, threw a bunch of people under the bus, even threw one of his players under the bus in the press conference after they fired Sean McDermott. Maybe head coaches didn't want to work with their GM, Brandon Beane. Very interesting there. But a domino that fell that does affect your Houston Texans is Brian Daboll will now be the Titans offensive coordinator, has basically committed to them unless he gets a head coaching job. I think the only one he's still in the mix for would be the Las Vegas Raiders. So unless the Raiders make him their head coach, it looks like Brian Daboll is headed to the Tennessee Titans. And, I saw multiple reports that he is really high on Cam Ward and excited to help him and, could possibly unlock a new version of Cam Ward, the former number 1 overall pick. Didn't have a great first year with Tennessee, but not a lot of great stuff was happening with the Titans this past season. I think their coaching staff gets a massive boost immediately. You get 2 former head coaches in there with Robert Saleh as your head coach and defensive mastermind. And then you have Brian Daboll, another former head coach, and was, a offensive staff member with the Buffalo Bills and really helped develop Josh Allen. This could be a mix that could really help out the Tennessee Titans, and that's bad news for your Houston Texans if the Titans are getting better. Another domino that kind of goes along with the whole Daboll going to the Tennessee Titans is he chose the Titans over being the Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator. He was, courted by Howie Roseman, Jeffrey Lurie, and Nick Sirianni of the Philadelphia Eagles. it looks like he decided to go with the Titans over the Eagles job, which means they are still looking to fill that position. Now, we know Jerrod Johnson has interviewed for that role. He formerly worked with Nick Sirianni with the Indianapolis Colts, so there could be a connection there. But the Colts did also interview Packers quarterback coach Sean Mannion. He could be another option for them, but with options dwindling, I wonder if Jerrod Johnson is going to be a finalist for this Philly offensive coordinator role. We talked about it, the past week, of the possibility of Johnson going to Philadelphia to be their next OC. That is becoming more and more likely as the days pass and different people are declining this Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator job. Very interesting to see, because if I'm the Eagles, I would want to go with a more experienced play caller than Jerrod Johnson, Sean Mannion, but they might not have the ability to do that. Now, they could also look at, the stats of the teams that are in the Super Bowl right now. Obviously, the New England Patriots, the Seattle Seahawks. They could look at, those stats to see if they can poach one of those guys from those coaching staffs. But I don't know. They're very interesting to see there. Also, along those same lines of, going back to Joe Brady with the Buffalo Bills, their offensive line coach and run game coordinator, Austin Gunn, has been requested an interview by the Jacksonville Jaguars to be their run game coordinator. Very interesting on that end. It looks like he could possibly go down to Jacksonville and be their O-line coach and run game coordinator. This could be big for them, because the past couple of years, I know everybody talks about Josh Allen. Everybody talks about the Bills. The first thing you think about is Josh Allen. James Cook has been awesome. 3 straight seasons of over 1,000 yards, averaging just under 5 yards a carry over the past 3 seasons with the Buffalo Bills. And their O-line has been touted as one of the best in the National Football League. So if the Jags were able to add the Bills run game coordinator, O-line coach, that could definitely help out that offense, help out Trevor Lawrence, and help out the Jacksonville Jaguars. So all this coaching news kind of impacting the Houston Texans indirectly, with the fact that Dable going to Tennessee, the Bills O-line coach possibly going to the Jacksonville Jags. All this stuff affects the Houston Texans. And along those same lines, speaking of the Jacksonville Jaguars, they announced today that they are retaining both of their coordinators after they were both in head coach interview cycles this past offseason. Grant Udinski, their offensive coordinator, was being interviewed for multiple positions. The Browns, the Bills, the Raiders, multiple teams wanted Grant Udinski. He is going to return to the Jacksonville Jags as their OC. And then Anthony Campanelli, their defensive coordinator, was in consideration for multiple teams as well, including the Arizona Cardinals. But it looks like he's going to stay in Jacksonville as their DC. And, that helps the Jags keep their continuity. They have their head coach, their 2 coordinators who are staying for another season. That'll only help the Jags as they look to rebound after a wild card exit this year. They won the AFC South, but the Texans, they did get a little further in the playoffs. Not going to brag, but I definitely will. That's all I got for you on today's show, folks. Make sure to hit me up on Twitter at Jeremy Chugs for the latest Texans news, Texans rumors, NFL news. I'm tweeting about, whatever comes to my mind. Make sure to give me a follow over there at Jeremy Chugs. And if you made it to the end of today's video, make sure drop those H's down in the comment section. I appreciate y'all. Hit that sub button for daily Texans content all year long.